Well, welcome back. You know, a lot of things changed in the federal government after the Civil War, and we're going to talk about a few of them here today, any one of which would take a segment or two or three even to explain them all, but we're going to keep it short. As we stated before, many new agencies were established as a result of the war, and several of them came under the jurisdiction of the War Department and its totalitarian leadership of Andrew Stanton. The federal government started to consolidate power over many aspects of American life, state governments, and the economy. Movements were established to promote the continuation of policies instituted during the war. One of the most successful was the continuation of the use of paper money. Now, the Greenback Party was established to promote this, along with the exclusive use of gold, to supposedly back up the value of the paper, or greenback, as it was called. A battle raged over gold and silver as to which one or both should be our monetary backing. Now, the Constitution referred to both, but European bankers wanted only gold because it meant they could manipulate the American economy, since they had a great deal of control over the world's gold supply. Silver was in more abundant supply in America, gold less so. In either case, the use of coin was the constitutional method, but the powers that be won out with the continued use of paper for money. The income tax was attempted to be placed on the people as a permanent tax after the war. An income tax was the second step recommended by Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto to help communize a country. The move failed in the Supreme Court, and it wasn't until the 16th Amendment was ratified that it became legal. Our founders knew that a direct tax on the people by the federal government would mean direct control over the people and business by the federal government, giving it extreme power. Thus, they wrote the Constitution to protect against this buildup of that power. The Southern states were not allowed back into the Union until they ratified the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including former slaves, and guaranteed all citizens equal protection under the laws. Keep in mind, in 1866, the United States government removed the Southern states from the Union after the war. They had not allowed them to secede, and the official position of the North during the war was that they were only states in rebellion, yet they declared them non-states after the war. They were required to perform as a state to ratify the 14th Amendment, while no longer being recognized as an official part of the Union. The South was divided into military districts, run by the War Department after the war. 11 states ratified this 14th Amendment after military rule was imposed. Most Southern states had rejected the amendment until ruled over by the military. The Union states of New Jersey, Ohio, and Oregon tried to withdraw their ratification but were not allowed to. The reason New Jersey tried was they said that specific states were unlawfully denied representation in the Congress at the time. Only one state rejection was allowed to stand, and that was Maryland's. Frankly, what the Congress did in regard to the 14th Amendment was unconstitutional. The 14th Amendment was finally legalized over the decades when all states ratified it years after it was put into effect. The lesson here is that Congress can do just about anything in this regard and get away with it. Think of how this would affect a constitutional convention or convention of the states today. The primary purpose may be for one thing, but the Congress could once again play games and completely undo the intent of such an initiative. It's a dangerous game, particularly under the new socialists that have been elected into Congress. Another problem that existed was the attempt to bring states back into the Union as something other than republics. The Constitution requires that every state have a republican form of government, a republic, not a democracy. By this time, several years after the war, and things started to calm down, the Constitution was too big an obstacle to get around. So the states were restored as nominal republics, but had lost a great deal of their state sovereignty in the process, not only in the South, but across the entire country. There were several attempts at land reform in the South that would have made Mao Zedong proud. These attempts were promoted by men like the socialist Carl Schurz. President Johnson stopped much of this, as well as other things he did to aggravate the conspiracy, which ultimately led to his impeachment. The Supreme Court became a mixed bag. Stanton was nominated to the court by President Grant, but died 4 days before he could assume his judicial office. Perhaps the worst of the long-term effect on the country was Chief Justice Morrison Remick Waite. Waite was a Skull and Bones member and had helped organize the Republican Party in Ohio. His decision in the Munn versus Illinois case argued that states had the right to regulate private enterprise as to the pricing and fees they charged. This was a giant step towards any state government controlling the economic system within their state, and perhaps beyond if the business affected the economy of any other state. This on top of the federal monetary policy and the beginnings of the national banking system, which came about during the Civil War. Now, one of the things that you may want to do is to look up that case and look at the minority report by the other justices. It is one of the best documents on private property rights that you'll ever read. We will get into the Johnson administration in a future segment. Let us point out just a few problems with the Grant administration. Grant appointed some of the worst people to his cabinet. 2 examples will suffice. One was Attorney General Ebenezer Hoar. He had been involved in helping raise money for the terrorist John Brown. He worked tirelessly to retain the paper money system, even though he was not in the Treasury. Hoar and another appointee, Jacob Cox, would help form the so-called Liberal Republican Party later and nominate the communist Horace Greeley for president. 2 was the appointment of the co-founder of Skull and Bones as Secretary of War and then Attorney General, Alphonso Taft. In this position, Taft played a behind-the-scenes role in settling the tie in the Electoral College that threw the election to Rutherford Hayes. Taft was then appointed U.S. Minister to Austria, then Russia, after he was a candidate for governor of Ohio, but he did not get the nomination due to his position of not wanting the Bible used in the public schools. These were the caliber of men in the federal government after the war. The war changed things, and from this time forward, the government would grow. The Constitution increasingly ignored to where we are today. Next week, we'll come back and talk about the influence of the deep state.